Hello, guys, and welcome to CastCast. I am your host, Casty Streeter. Today, we are going to be looking at the games for Week 14, Thursday night football to Monday nights, and to see, which games I think and who's going to win. And overall, I think that, we have some interesting matchups, and this is really where teams are going to start to, get eliminated, obviously, from the playoffs, and where playoff seeding, with how tight it's been, can change. So starting off, we are going to look at the Cowboys and the Detroit Lions. So in any case, the Cowboys and Lions have had an interesting history over the last couple of years, where a couple of years ago there was a controversial call. A guy who reported it was claimed to not have reported, and it essentially lost the game for the Lions, and it affected playoff seeding. Last year, when they played, the Lions played it like it was a game of Madden. They ran up the score on Dallas. Dallas really got butchered by them. And now this year, this is wild because this has playoff implications again, where Dallas and Detroit meet up in Detroit. I know that for Dallas to even think about potentially making the postseason, they really need to win out. So they don't really have a choice at 6-5-1. They are the 8th seed currently. Or I'm sorry, the 9th seed. In I guess the playoffs, there's obviously not a 9th seed, and the Lions are number 8. Because you got teams like the Seahawks 9-3, the Packers 8-3-1, and the Niners at 9-4. And obviously the Lions can't really, depending on what happens with Packers Bears, which they'll be watching intently. They still really need to win out and hope that one of those teams either falls or starts losing to get in, or one of these other teams start losing, and it just doesn't really look that way, and it could be very dicey. They are saying that Amon-Ra is questionable with his ankle injury, and they say he's kind of expected to play. They haven't ruled him out. I know that the Frank Ragnow news kind of hit hard right before Thanksgiving last week, but it has now been reported that he is going to be unable to return because he had a grade 3 hamstring injury when he did his physical and that sort of thing. So they are not going to be getting the bolster on the O-line that people kind of thought they were. Obviously, Dallas has been kind of playing some pretty good teams. We look at, they beat Kansas City, they beat Philadelphia. Obviously, they handled the Raiders. They are on a 3-game win streak, whereas the Lions, their only win recently was against the Giants. So, losing to teams like Philly and then, Green Bay last week, you're kind of thinking like, oh my goodness, if we had won one more of these games, we would have been a lot better of a situation, but that's not the case for them, and they are favored only by 3 in this game. I really think that Dallas, his DBs are going to get, not Dallas, Detroit's DBs are going to get scorched by Lamb and Pickens. I really think that Detroit isn't going to be able to do much against, Dallas's offensive attack, and I just think that Dallas has a little bit more of an edge over Detroit because you look at the recent acquisitions of Quinnen Williams, Logan Hall, and I guess, importantly at the beginning of the season, Kenny Clark. They have a defense that has, started to look better against the run. And so I don't think it's going to be a walk in the park for Detroit to win this. Like, you look at history and it's kind of like, oh, who's going to come in and come out on top? And I think I'm actually going to go with Dallas to win this game. I think that they can get revenge, and the players here kind of remember that game, and they're going to be like, well, we're going to show them because they aren't the same team. And I think that they just have more firepower, to bring this game in. But moving on to the next game, we are going to look at Eagles Chargers, which is December 8th, which is Monday Night Football. Obviously I'm kind of going, somewhat backwards here, but I'm trying out something new, you guys. But anyway, Philadelphia visit the Chargers. Philadelphia hasn't quite looked like the team that we remember. They just lost to the Bears. And to me, the problem with the Eagles is that they have so much like mental anguish, amongst their team, where can you hardly even look at this record and say they are as good as their record right now? No, I can't say that. And same with the Chargers. The Chargers have been, bizarre. They have only lost 4 games, but the losses haven't looked pretty. We obviously look at Jacksonville. Obviously, they had a bye before going against the Raiders last week, and they handled the Raiders, pretty easily. And, but Jacksonville schooled them. And now, what started off as a very promising season, they are now behind the Broncos in their division. The Eagles, I don't think, even if they drop this game, it's one of those things that you look at this and it's like you're still ahead of Dallas, who you split with. So it only comes down to conference or divisional record and that sort of thing. So losing here wouldn't be bad for them, but you are traveling across the country. It's a long plane ride. And I think that the Chargers are going to ultimately be able to just, not give up a lot of points against Philadelphia, who hasn't shown me enough. So I'm going with the Chargers to win this game, despite the Eagles being favored. Moving on, let's get another interesting, let's kind of swap back here. We're going to look at the Seahawks and the Falcons. The Falcons, very disappointing this year. Seattle has looked very, very good. The Falcons, who, it's weird how their defense had started off so well. And then you have, games recently where you give up a lot to the Jets. You lose to the Jets. The last team you beat was New Orleans, which who cares? And then you had 2 overtime games, which were ultimately the backbreakers of their season. If they had been able to somehow win these, and they even play New England tough, which is funny because New England, has the current reigning MVP. So looking at this, Darnold has a questionable injury. He's going to play. I don't think it's going to matter too much. And then you look at some of these other injuries. I don't think it really matters. Drake London coming back. I don't think he's going to be able to do much against the Seattle defense. I think that they're going to get after Kirk Cousins, and it's not going to be pretty for Kirk. I'm just going to say that. I'm going to go with Seattle to get the win here. Pretty easy win. Bengals and Buffalo. The Bengals obviously are clinging to this tiny hope that they have a shot to make the postseason. Currently, they have a 2% shot to make the postseason, and they have to win out. They pretty much have to win out, in my opinion. But it's like you're going to need a lot of teams to lose, or for your division to potentially go into a landslide between the Steelers and the Ravens, who are 6-6. Obviously, the Bengals do play the Ravens, here again at the end of the season, but they've already played Pittsburgh twice and they split the games with them. Not saying that Pittsburgh's going to just eke you out and not be able to win, but this game should be one for the ages. I know that Buffalo is favored, but I don't see why. Burrow's back. He's getting Higgins back as well. He's not injured for this game. I think he'll, I'm pretty confident he'll be back from the concussion because he missed the last game, last Thursday with the concussion as well. And he's going to be able to clear it before the weekend is over, unless it's a really bad concussion. You also have Trey Hendrickson, who is upgraded to doubtful. Who knows if he plays? I'm sure he will if he can. But overall, this game, to me, if you have Chase Brown, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, you can win it as the Bengals, because these two teams ultimately have kind of shown that, hey, we don't have much for defense, but the defenses can come and make a play every now and again. But I am actually going Cincinnati because I am not really bought on Buffalo. Even though they are 5-1 at home, I'm picking the underdog for this game because I think that Burrow looked rusty, but he was still able to own the Ravens. And the Ravens have more of a defense than than Buffalo has. So I'm going with Cincinnati to win this game. Titans and Browns. The Browns, had that funny, we can try to compete for a playoff spot. That is obviously snuffed out. It's kind of funny. They're not officially eliminated from the playoffs like Tennessee is. But Tennessee is marching straight for the number one pick again, which isn't bad. But Cleveland, I'm going to pick them just because of their defense, and it is at home. I don't think, this game ultimately... some might root for the Browns just so that their pick might rise. Some 4-win teams. I'm not going to mention who, you guys, but you could theorize who. But the Browns, to me, are going to get after Cam Ward. It's going to be way too hard of a game for him to be able to execute and put up points. And I think that, Shedeur Sanders, while they lost last week, I think he has added and revitalized this team's momentum a little bit. So I'm going with the Browns. Going to the Commanders and the Vikings. This game is weird. I'm assuming McCarthy's going to be back. Let's see here. JJ McCarthy, questionable with the concussion. It'll have been 2 weeks. They estimate, obviously, it's time to return here. Darrisaw with his foot injury hopefully can return to form. Not that it matters too much against Washington, but Washington did play a pretty good game on Sunday night, despite me thinking that, there's no way they're going to play very well. So looking at this, they say Jaden Daniels could be back, and he'll have Scary Terry back, who looked as good as ever. I am actually going to go with Washington. I think that Washington played with some real good flair and offensive prowess, and to me, the Vikings just don't have any of that. So I'm going with Washington to win this game. Dolphins-Jets. A pretty meaningless game. Again, kind of a 3-9 team. And Miami, who could still theoretically make it. But it's kind of like, who do they play? Depending on who they play, they could make the postseason, I guess, but I'm sure they have to go up against it. So yeah, this is kind of a tough gauntlet. Like, New York's the easiest. And then you look at this and you think Pittsburgh's the second easiest, which is funny to say. And then I would go, Cincinnati, it only gets harder, I feel like. That's kind of funny. It only gets harder. And do we really think, and I mean, New England could have secured something by this time and rest their starters, depending on what Vrabel wants to do, but it only gets harder. And if you're going to win this out, then yeah, I would say you probably earned a spot potentially to make the playoffs, but... really kind of funny. Do we think the Dolphins have it in them? I mean, maybe. I think the Jets looked, pretty good last week, and they obviously benched for Tyrod Taylor and they beat Atlanta. Obviously, it would spoil I wouldn't say spoil, but it would ruin the Dolphins' chances by, winning here. Who do I go with? I feel like New York. I don't know if they win here. I think that I'm feeling that Achan's going to have a big game. I'm going to go with the Dolphins. I just think they have a better rushing attack, and their passing attack is probably better than the Jets. Maybe not by a lot, but I'm going with Miami. I just think that they have the running back that could ultimately carry them to a win. And, we'll see. This is kind of a who knows what kind of game. Saints and Buccaneers. Obviously, the Buccaneers really need to win here. They have the Panthers, who just had an incredible win against the Rams and are breathing down their neck for, the division. Because that's the only way I see any team in this division making the postseason is winning this division, because this is arguably outside of the AFC North. This is the next weakest division in the league. It's definitely the weakest in the NFC. But looking at this, you have Benjamin Morrison potentially coming back. I think that's good. Not that it matters a huge amount. There's nothing really here. I mean, Alvin Kamara looks like he's going to play. Reed will play. I think that Baker is just going to take care of business against, the Saints. And it's, they just played against Arizona, who has a pretty stout D, and they beat them. So I really think that they're going to play the Saints, and they're going to big brother them, and they're going to win this game that they need to win. So I'm going with Tampa Bay, who's favored by a pretty big margin. Colts, Jaguars. This is a now huge game. Obviously, looking at this, we have Houston, who looks like the hottest team, in my opinion, in this division. And then you have Indy and Jacksonville. Indy looked like they were running away with it. Jacksonville has had a weird season where, you have Travis Hunter hurt, but you've somehow started to put slews of games together, starting with, after this colossal collapse. I think that, their coach really rallied them and has got them playing and put some heat under them. And maybe he's finally figured out the formula for this team. I don't want to jinx him, but maybe he's finally figured out the formula for the Jaguars, because they put up points that we used to always knock on them for just falling asleep in second halves. They'd have leads that they would blow. They would have close games that ultimately the offense couldn't close out the game. And Trevor Lawrence, who at this point, he should be playing for his job, in my opinion. I think if he's going to get another extension, I don't think they trade or release him unless there's some monumental collapse. But the Jaguars, it's their division to lose now, because you look at the Colts, and granted they played, I wouldn't say Kansas City's the team they were, obviously, but they played Houston, and they played them tough. So, perhaps they can travel to Jacksonville and win. And, maybe I'll regret, I guess one thing that I'll say is that, Sauce Gardner being doubtful does help the Jaguars, obviously. And the Indianapolis Colts had just gotten Charvarius Ward back. So they have him back, which is good. And I look at this and I think that the Colts, I'm actually going to go with the Colts to win this game. I just think they've had a couple of tough losses and they need to rekindle that magic. And I think that you look at Jonathan Taylor, who's still having a great year, could still have something to prove. And I think that Indy's going to go to Jacksonville and they're going to prove that they are the team to win this division, potentially. Now we move on to Steelers-Ravens. Huge game. Whoever wins this game will obviously be winning the division. Right now, Baltimore wins, I'm sure, through some conference or interdivisional record or something like that. And you've got Cincinnati, who's hopeful, but it could definitely happen. I'm picking the Ravens because they had a very lackluster week. And while I would like to see Aaron Rodgers make the postseason as a Packers fan, and he's an ex-Packer, I just think that the Steelers do not have the firepower to do what the Bengals did last week to this Baltimore Ravens defense. It's night and day. Not saying between the, two QBs. Obviously, Bro is a lot younger and in his prime. But overall, you just have DK Metcalf and a couple of tight ends that you like to dish the ball to every now and again, including Washington and other and Jonnu Smith and Freiermuth. But I just think that Pittsburgh's going to run into a buzzsaw with Baltimore, and I think that Baltimore's going to have the edge in this game, so I'm picking Baltimore. Broncos, Raiders. I don't really think I need to say much about this. The Broncos are going to win this. Obviously, you look at, kind of standings, and Denver needs to keep up with the Patriots, who now have 11 wins and they're going into a bye. And with the final 4 weeks of the season, it's going to be, knockout blow if you happen to lose. And if you happen to lose to the Raiders here, that's going to put into question really your entire identity. Because it's like they should be able to go and punish Geno quite a lot like they did in the first meeting. So I'm going with the Denver Broncos. Moving on, we're going to do Rams Cardinals. Rams obviously playing a divisional opponent that somehow always seems to play scrappy with, get teams within the division and even other teams that they've played. Obviously, 4 straight losses. You think that, hey, Arizona was in the playoff hunt in a stacked division, but then you drop, all these games against, playoff teams essentially right now. And obviously Seattle and San Fran were terrible losses, but you were with Jacksonville and Tampa Bay. Even though I would say San Fran and Seattle are the upper echelon of these teams. But you look at the Rams, Stafford just kind of got, I wouldn't say unlucky, but it was time. It's just hard, and it's honestly mentally straining when you haven't thrown a pick in a while. You can't tell me it doesn't linger in some QBs because they'll be like as hot as they can be, and then that goes away a little bit because it's hard to maintain what the Rams had been doing the time before. And even we look at it against Seattle, they didn't play a super pretty game, and it was more Seattle's mistakes that lost them that game. So you look at the Rams, and they obviously aren't the number 1 seed anymore with that loss, because we have a team called the Bears, which we'll get to that game, which I think is the game of the week. But you look at this game, and overall, it is just too hard for me to pick against the Rams, who I think it could be tough for them, but I don't see the Cardinals being able to close, I guess, against the Rams and win. Now we're going to look at Texans and Chiefs, Sunday Night Football. Both of these teams, another one of these where whatever team loses is probably out of the playoffs. And Houston has been on a heater. I know that Kansas City beat the Colts, but then they lose to Dallas on Thanksgiving, a game that, hey, you could have won this game. But they just overall don't have that zeal to win all these close games anymore. Whereas the Texans, they were like, oh, we're going to put up, and we're not going to concede our season, starting with this huge comeback in Jacksonville. A Tennessee game that was closer than it needed to be, I guess. But then Buffalo they handle, and they sack Allen like 8 times, I think. And then Indy, who they force, turnovers and show the ability of their defense, which I think that their defense is performing the best in the league right now. And that's really, pretty obvious, Captain Obvious. But in any case, we look at the Texans. They don't really have to me, they don't have any injuries that are worrisome. It'd be nice if they did have Mixon, if I'm being honest, but that just, that adds a little bit to their offense. But you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, banged up O-line. Trey Smith, their best lineman, questionable, he will play, but you want to be 100% as you can against this Houston front. And then Josh Simmons, he has that wrist injury. Not easy to block when your wrist is probably nagging and you've got to be able to pivot and you're going up against Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. It's pretty nutty. So looking at this game, and Stroud played well enough last week that I'm not super worried when he goes up against Kansas City. Don't get me wrong, you always have to worry a little bit with Kansas City just because they're well coached and they've been there and they've done that. But I think Houston comes away with a win here. I don't understand why Kansas City is still I wouldn't say heavily favored because it's 3.5 points. But Houston, this is the team that knocked them out of the playoffs last year. And they're out for revenge. I just think that they're going to be able to match up really well with these wide receivers, with the DBs they have. They're so stacked on defense, you guys. And I think that offensively, I think that they've been able to do things. It hasn't been necessarily pretty, but they've been functioning at a good enough level. And I just think they're going to be able to get after Mahomes and they're going to be able to punish him. So I'm actually going with the Texans in this game. And then going to the final game of the week, Bears-Packers. I will say this about the Bears, being a Packers fan, you guys. Green Bay favored by 6.5. The reason I think that this is the case, and I stand by this, as we look at the Bears this year, we'll go to their full schedule just so I can kind of lay it out. So we have the schedule. Obviously, they started off the season rocky. I mean, Minnesota wasn't really rocky, but the fact that, McCarthy has looked as bad as he has this year, week 1, right? But it's still a bad loss that probably is still looming over them potentially. And then Detroit literally puts them in the slammer, in jail this game. But you look at the teams they've played now. Dallas, winning team, but they hadn't really yet. To me, Dallas hadn't really yet hit their stride offensively. Even though Dak has been doing good this year, but it's been at home, if we're being honest with you. And then Raiders not good, Washington not good, New Orleans not good. At this point, Baltimore was not good, you guys. Cincinnati, and they lost to Baltimore, pretty significantly. Cincinnati, this game they got lucky. I will continue to stand by that you don't see them outright winning this game and then being forced to kick a field goal go into overtime against Cincinnati. And then New York hasn't been good, but has had zeal, but we know they're not that great of a team. Minnesota, not good, barely. Honestly, I think that this game was kind of lucky. And that Caleb, he only threw for this much and that sort of thing. But, it's like, I'm not saying that they haven't improved, but you look at even Pittsburgh was their first game against a winning team at the time. And Pittsburgh's hasn't been great, as we know. And they didn't have Aaron Rodgers, the Bear killer. And then Philadelphia. Say what you will about the Bears. I don't think this is as impressive of a win as people want to give them credit for. I picked the Bears to win this game because I don't trust Philadelphia. And Philadelphia's been a joke this year. You cannot tell me any other case. Their offense hasn't been good. Their defense has had, sporadic success, but it's not enough to carry them. They've just happened to play like bad teams that commit these penalties or, these turnovers, or just don't put up any sort of fight against them. And it's like, I'm saying this from a team that, really struggled. My team's really struggled against Philadelphia. But I don't know what to say, but the Bears haven't had the toughest of schedules, you guys. And, it goes to say that they were last in the division, last year in the NFC North, of course. So when they go play Green Bay, and you look at the final remaining of their schedule, Detroit might be fighting for a playoff spot. San Fran might be fighting for a playoff spot. And, Green Bay, they can take control of their own destiny just winning these 2 games and making it crazy hard for the Bears to win the division, and they know that. And they have, I don't think the Packers have missed a beat lately either. I think that Love has played incredible the way he played on Thanksgiving. And to me, here's the problem with the Bears ultimately. They don't really have that great of a pass rusher. They have Sweat, who is their leader, with 7.5. This will get you in the, will catch you in the postseason. You need to be able to put pressure on these good QBs. And they haven't played QBs of the caliber of like Jordan Love. It's like you look at some of the guys they've played and it's like, even Lamar, or even when they played the Ravens, it's like, Lamar hasn't been the same this year, and just ultimately all this sort of thing. And I'm going to stop ratting on them, but you kind of look at who was coming back and this and this and that, but you also have the Packers who are having guys come back. They likely have Quay Walker coming back. They have Matthew Golden coming back. Jaden, and I know he hasn't done that much, but he's a big play waiting to happen with how much yards of separation that he got. Check the next gen analytics. I'm serious. But and then you also have Jaden Reed, who is going to add a needed dynamic to this offense since Tucker Kraft got hurt. And I think the Packers have been playing very, very sound defense. Obviously, last week, Goff went on a heater at home, and he did his best to win. But ultimately, they were able to stop them enough and had control of that game the whole time to where it's like, oh, we don't need to limit every single team under 20 to be able to beat them. So I do think that Green Bay at home, where, they had a couple of doozy losses at home this year, which sucks, but they realize that, this is one of 2 home games left in the season for them. So they need to be able to defend home here and beat the Bears. And I just think that while the Bears got Johnson that came back and then Kyler Gordon, who are both sound players, I'm not discounting that. The teams they've went up against, like the lackluster passing attack of the Eagles, and yet they still allowed a bomb to Brown, which seemingly he's been able to get at least one of those a game every, seemingly recently, almost every game. But the Bears defense, I think, can finally get exposed by a passing attack that it was actually clicking. And if Watson continues to play the way he has, and Wicks played the way he was last week, and the way that'll also complement the running game, which has been getting better, I think the Bears will have a very tough hand to win this game. So I'm picking my Packers. And we'll see. And overall, I think the Bears have ran through their rushing attack. And I think the Packers' rushing defense has been one of the best in the league. So I'm going with my Packers because I do truly think that it's an uphill battle for the Bears. And while they're the 1 seed, I think the Packers realize that, hey, we can go out here swinging, take care of the Bears, and win this thing. But that's going to do it for my opinions on this, you guys. If you have any comments, questions or thoughts on any of these games, please feel free to let me know down in the comment section. But I am your host, Cassidy Streeter, and as always, go Pack Go.